Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for the latest in the series of IAB Mobile Marketing Center of Excellence webinars. I'm really excited about today's topic. We're talking about using location data in a sort of innovative way to measure ad effectiveness or as a KPI for ad campaigns. I'm Joe Laszlo. I'm a Senior Director here at the IAB, and I help to run the Mobile Center within the Interactive Advertising Bureau. You're all on the line today to hear some specific examples from 4 companies that are leading the charge towards this innovative way to use location data. But before we get there, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes and introduce the topic, talk a little bit about the Mobile Center as well. So first off, the Mobile Center is sort of a trade association within the larger IAB devoted specifically to the growth of mobile as an advertising medium, as a marketing medium. We're supported by about 21 board member companies and a much larger list of supporting member companies. And so I always like to start these presentations by thanking the companies that help pay a little extra in terms of IAB dues to help us do what we do to set standards, do research, and hold webinars like this one. It sort of goes without saying that mobile is booming. eMarketer's latest data, and you can look at any research firm that you like, but eMarketer says about 1.64 billion smartphone users at the end of 2014, creating a very powerful new marketing and advertising platform, but also a very powerful platform in terms of the kinds of data that smartphones generate and transmit that can be relevant not just to mobile advertising campaigns, but to all different kinds of advertising campaigns as well. And clearly, as consumers become mobile first, media content becomes mobile first as well. This is some data from ComScore as of the end of last year that shows for more and more different kinds of content categories, more than 50% of the time spent with those categories in the digital world is spent on a mobile device. So for categories like photos, maps, weather, and even online gaming, it's not just a mobile-first world, it's almost a mobile-only world. But again, regardless of category, I think you see this sea change happening where more and more usage is coming from mobile. Again, that's not quite germane to today's topic, but I think it's important and valuable to remind us all how important mobile is becoming. Getting a little more focused on today, from a shopping perspective, mobile's role in-store and for commerce on mobile devices both are very, very important. But in-store in particular, I feel like that the transformation we're just on the cusp of a major change in the way that people use their mobiles to help them shop. In part, that's going to be aided and abetted by beacons and other kinds of in-store technologies. Forbes has said that this year is probably the year of the beacon, part 1, and BI Intelligence forecasts over $4 billion in beacon-influenced retail sales this year, which is 10x growth, or 10x growth in the coming years. So mobile is transformational. We're all living mobile-first lives. We know that. But I think marketers are really only scratching the surface in terms of how mobile can help them be smarter about marketing. And that brings us to the topic for today. Today we really want to drill down and look very closely at a very particular aspect of the way that location data are being used for marketing purposes today, and that is in terms of assessing the effectiveness of advertising campaigns. Everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but I feel like it's a fairly known thing in the industry about ways to use location to target ad campaigns, right? And I'll start with a specific example. So on screen, this is a map. This is where the IAB is located on East 27th Street in New York City. This is Van Diemen's, which is the local Tasmanian bar. And I think a perfectly good example of a way to use geo-targeting or geofencing as one aspect of using location for marketing purposes would be, let's say Van Diemen's wants to do a mobile ad campaign, attract people for happy hour. They put a radius around their location of however far they think it's going to take to get customers in the door, and they say to their ad services vendor, I want to reach people just within that sphere or that radius. So that's a geofence. Again, I think a fairly well understood concept. In this case, Van Diemen's has probably planned its geofence a little too narrowly because people at the IAB would almost certainly go there to drink if we were in the radius of that campaign. A slightly different way to use geofences is not just to sort of set a radius around a given location to try to attract people into a location, but to set a radius around a place given something that you know about the people that go to that place. So that's Madison Square Park, again, kind of close by the IAB. And, you might be a marketer who thinks, Madison Square Park at lunchtime on a nice day in the spring is full of executives from the advertising and digital media companies in the vicinity. So I want to do a campaign that reaches people in Madison Square Park at that particular point in time. That's not because you're trying to attract them into a place, but it's because you know something about the people in that place and you know that your message is going to be relevant. Again, I think these manifestations of location in the world of marketing are pretty well known and well understood. What's new or what's different, and the subject of the primer document that the IAB released in February, is using location data not on the going in part, not setting up a campaign to reach relevant consumers, but on the back end of the campaign to understand what kinds of actions did people take based on the campaign that they were exposed to. So the primer that the IAB released, you can find it at iab.net/mobile if you haven't seen it already. It really kind of highlights some of the key things that marketers need to keep in mind if they're thinking about leveraging location for this kind of ROI type purpose, as opposed to for geofencing or other sorts of location campaign planning. I'll go into the primer very briefly, and then I'll turn it over to the first of our case studies. The primer goes into how to locate the device, how to locate places, just sort of a little bit of a lay of the land for people who aren't familiar with those sorts of technologies, a little bit about beacons because they're going to be very important here, and other kinds of indoor location technologies, and then ways to marry transaction data with location data, because I think that's one of the very interesting things that's going on in this world is a lot of the campaigns that are using this sort of technology are looking at foot traffic, people coming into a store. Some of them are going kind of a step beyond that and actually looking at sales data as a way to assess not just did somebody come into my store, but did they actually purchase based on an ad exposure. Another key point in the primer is that this is not limited to as a way to assess the effectiveness of mobile advertising campaigns. Location data can be used to assess other kinds of ad campaigns as well, as we get to the ability to follow people from one medium or one platform to another platform. We're getting to the point where we can tell somebody who was exposed to a TV spot or an out-of-door spot or a PC-based digital spot, kind of what did they do? Did they actually go into a store? Did they go to a specific location based on that message? And again, I think mobile is coming to the fore as an effectiveness mechanism, not just for mobile advertising, but for all kinds of ad campaigns. As I said before, there are really kind of two kinds of metrics that people are following here. Foot traffic, right, which is just did people come into my store, which depending on the goal of the campaign, that can be great. A classic for automotive dealers, let's say, is looking at after an ad campaign, did you get more traffic to dealer locations? But you can also layer on top of that sales lift studies as well that can say not just did I get people moving into the physical environment I wanted them to move into, but how much was spent as a result of that. The IAB doesn't. I should say the IAB doesn't really take a stand on which of those is better. It really depends on the campaign goal, which you should be measuring, and which might be easier to measure. But we'll hear from some of the case studies ways to illuminate some of those decision choices. The other thing that the primer does is it sets up, really there are two essential ways to do location as a return on investment metric. You can use a sample or a panel and do something statistically based or probabilistic. You can also measure directly or deterministically. And again, the IAB doesn't take a stand on one of those being inherently better than the other. Each has its own pros and cons in our view. But buyers should be aware that there are these two basic methodological approaches, and really kind of ask a vendor or a partner as you're planning to start using location data in this way. Really make sure you understand kind of what your partner is doing, how they're doing it, just to make sure that you go in with the right sorts of expectations. So that's really it for my quick introduction. With that, I get to turn the floor over to four leading experts from four great companies, all of whom kind of helped create the primer and have been great as far as educating the IAB about these topics. So we'll go in order based on, alphabetically based on company, and that means that first to take the floor, I'm happy to introduce Lauren Moores. Lauren is Vice President of Analytics at Distillery, and she'll take us through the first case study. So Lauren, let me give control to you, which that should do it. So
Okay.
Please take it away.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you everyone for listening to the webinar today. I'm glad to present one of the first case studies on location-based measurement. And in this case study, we worked with my industry colleague David Shim at Placed, and we were measuring a desktop campaign for a big box retailer. So let's see if I can get to the next slide. Oh, it works. That's great. So Distillery, just a little brief note on who we are. At the core, we're a predictive marketing platform, and for our marketers, we are finding cross-device prospect audiences, and we deliver those messages to those audiences cross-channel, so desktop and mobile, programmatically. We have a self-serve platform, and we have a managed service platform. So mobility data, what do I mean by that? Behavior and location. It's a key data signals that are just exploding based off of the amount of devices that we're using, in the U.S. and globally. And it comes from smartphones, tablets, wearables, and it's a great example of new data that improves our ability to better understand not only audiences, but actually to measure the effectiveness of campaigns. And how is that done? Well, location is one of the key signals besides behavior, and it goes beyond geo-targeting, as Joe mentioned, with his example of the bar nearby the IAB Center. And it puts in context like Madison Square Garden, or Madison Square Park, where you know that, hey, that might be an area where I would like to reach certain people, and I'm going to make a assumption about who those people are. But more importantly and more accurately, you can put location in context by figuring out where all the brands are. So for a particular marketer that you're working with, you figure out all their locations and indicate, as you can see here on this slide, we have a example of one of our marketers where they have locations throughout the U.S. And all the dots represent one of those locations. And we're able to put that in context and associate that with the device and cookies that we see that come through our program. So location is key, but more importantly, being able to do cross-device allows you to not only find the right audiences at the right time, but also to measure them effectively. And I know Joe mentioned it, that cross-device modeling can happen. It could be deterministic or it could be probabilistic. In this case, we have a probabilistic cross-device graph, and that allows us to measure online campaigns and to offline, and not only mobile but also desktop. And in particular, what we're doing is we're using a combination and time and location patterns in order to associate devices together so that cookies and, or I should say desktops and smartphones and tablets that are seen in the same place at the same time, using the most accurate data possible to determine that, meaning that we're going to use Wi-Fi. We're not going to use information from a Starbucks store. We're going to use information from a household. And we're going to group those users together, and that will be our cross-device mapping. And this allows you to not only do new mobile-based modeling, but it also allows you to measure desktop campaigns for in-store attribution, something that we've been trying to do in market research for a long time, is answer that online to offline problem. In particular, when you have the ability to do cross-device, you're able to reach at scale. And in this particular graph, what I'm showing here is different ways that we can reach the audiences. And I wanted to show that to put the next couple slides into context, where we have 5 different brands here that are represented by taking their locations and understanding where they are, associating devices with them, but also then using the crosswalk to associate devices with cookies that allows you to then build a broader audience and reach different marketers' audiences. So in this instance, say that we were working with Saks Fifth Avenue, we could decide to build a model off of people who've gone to Gap and Macy's as the conquest audience that Saks wanted to reach. It just depends on what the marketer's goals are, or how broad you might want to define the new prospect audiences for your brand. And now to the case study. So given the background of being able to use mobile and desktop and also do cross-device, I'd like to talk a little bit about Placed. So we started working with Placed mid-2014, one of the first providers working with David and team in order to provide our marketers a way to measure mobile, right? And we extended that into measuring desktop because we still have a lot of our marketers who are doing majority desktop, and as they move into mobile, being able to provide the same type of metric. So it's okay, this particular desktop campaign gave you this much in in-store visits or this much in in-store incremental sales, and then you can compare that to how well that happened on the mobile side. You can't do that unless you have the cross-device ability. You also can't do that unless you have location and context. And so Placed is a 500,000 opt-in panel. It's a mobile-based panel with some expansion working with people like us and others to get to the desktop side. And what it allows you to do is then, for us, particularly at Distillery, to have a third party look at our campaign effectiveness and put it in context beyond our looking at our own campaign performance results. In this case, as Joe mentioned, and what is prevalent throughout the primer, is that mobile is the key here to unlocking better path to purchase metrics. And it's really exciting to be able to have a data signal that allows you to answer a question that we've been trying to answer for a long time, but in addition to providing a metric that allows you to evaluate mobile. And for most of us in this industry, mobile measurement is difficult, particularly because you got different platforms, you have different SDKs, you have different technology limitations that don't allow you to always measure conversion that happens on mobile. However, if you can measure that conversion through in-store, then you're allowing the marketer to go back and say, hey, you know what, our mobile campaigns really are effective. So in this case study, we were working with a big box retailer who has a pretty large footprint and was doing a desktop campaign, particularly for this study. And what we did is we created different prospect models on our side where we were reaching people who had gone to their website, who had gone to a particular action within the website, and also those people who had visited their stores. And we use that to build a new audience and also to delivering messaging. So using our crosswalk information, we walked cookies over to device IDs and sent that information over to Placed, where Placed matched it to their panel and was able to provide the ad effectiveness of the overall campaign, particularly in, how much did people who saw the ad, how much were we able to provide lift in terms of store visits, how much were we able to provide lift in terms of likely to purchase, and we also measured the overall return on ad spend. So we were thrilled with this study. First of all, because it was the first one, it was early on, and we were able to show that for our particular campaign, that 34% were more likely to visit the store, or the broad footprint of the stores. 5% were more likely to purchase in-store. And we looked at the return on ad spend two ways. First, we just looked particularly at everybody that was hit in the campaign, and we had a crazy 1,725% return on ad spend. But we know that some of these customers would have bought anyhow. So very important to measure the incrementality, which was done by Placed and using Placed data, where we were able to provide the 433% incremental return on ad spend, which is still terrific. It's not 1,700, but I'd much rather have a accurate metric there for the client than to overstate. And that's it. I'm very happy to continue to work with third-party measurement. We not only work with place, but we also work with ninth decimal and factual on case studies, as we feel it's really important to have a third party provide these metrics on our own campaigns. Thanks, Joe.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. That's terrific. So as I'm getting ready to segue us to the next presentation, I just realized I was a bad host at the outset of the call today and didn't go through the usual logistical details. So I will say right now, we are recording today's webinar, so it will be available on the IAB website sometime in the next couple days. And questions. I think we'll handle all questions after all four presenters have gone, but do feel free at any time to submit a question via the GoToWebinar interface, the GoToMeeting interface, and we'll get to as many of those as we can after all four of the case studies. So with that, I will segue to Keith Kilpatrick. Keith is Vice President of Product Management at Ninth Decimal, and he'll talk us through the second of our series of case studies. So Keith, I'm giving control to you. Hopefully you have it. Whoops, that's me. Hopefully you have it now, and take it away.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Joe, and good morning from San Francisco to the IAB community on this wonderful tax day. Don't forget to submit those taxes if you haven't. Thanks, Lauren, for setting the tone and the pace, and really appreciate the shout out. I'm on the product team here, and I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes, again, at the end of the presentation, we'll go through the case study that we did with Microsoft. And I do want to use a few slides, as Lauren did, to talk about, again, methodologies as considerations as you look at doing offline measurement and using location data, in your day-to-day media operations and planning. So Ninth Decimal, just our quick tagline, we're the most comprehensive understanding of people by looking at their digital and connecting their digital and physical lives. From a product perspective, we do this. We actually sell our audiences programmatically out there across the ecosystem using a location signal that they're built upon. We actually do a lot of omni-channel media executions, and we actually have a white-labeled measurement solution called LCI, which I'll talk you through here in a second. That's being white-labeled by Madison Avenue and used by some other folks. And again, this is how we're using location signal to provide insight into consumer beyond the click and beyond secondary digital engagement. What I'm going to talk to you about today briefly in the next 9 to 8 minutes that I have is the Location Conversion Index. And this is a measurement product, and you'll see this pretty consistently with most measurement products, whether it's offline sales or whether it's offline measurement. Of course, there's a media exposure. There's a measurement of actually an analysis of visits to the store and secondary behaviors within the store, whether that's spend or other activity post-store visits. And of course, the measurement and attribution. The big thing for us, and Lauren touched on this, as she talked about place in the panel approach, and we're more of a direct measure approach, is that incrementality really is mattering because you don't want to take credit, for people that are going into the store naturally. You actually want to count that incremental visits. So how does LCI work? And sorry, I'm jumping around here. So again, target an audience, whether it's a Ninth Decimal audience or whether it's another vendor segment on a different media channel. Again, monitor and look at that campaign and optimize. And again, you can use a lot of these offline metrics, especially location, which you get a much quicker read in some cases than sales. So you can actually start optimizing against the placement or against the audience or against the channel partner or the media partner that you're running against. And then as you look at that over time, you start looking at the offline attribution and correlating that back to your clicks, your sell-throughs, your secondary sign-up actions, and looking at, are you driving also offline behavior? So that's what we're looking at. I want to talk briefly about methodology. And again, the marketing ROI paper that Joe and Belinda and team over there at the IAB put out does a very, very nice analysis of this, so make sure you read it if you haven't. I'm going to talk specifically about a direct measure methodology and what we think is important here at Ninth Decimal. So the first thing that we do is we actually have integrations across the ecosystem into exchanges, into supply-side partners, as well as into direct publisher relationships. And we have the data usage rights there to actually look at that location data and use it to build audiences and to measure. For us, this is very important because we actually keep 13 months of this on file for about the 1 billion devices we have profiled, which translates to about 110 million uniques here in the U.S. and across about 52 million, there's a typo on the slide here, business and household locations. So in order to really adjust for incrementality and get a baseline and to adjust for seasonality, you really do have to have that 13 months of location data on file across those devices and across all the physical locations that you're being measured. So that's the first thing we do to actually get to this lift measure, and something as you're looking at direct measure versus panel, look at the different considerations and the methodologies and approaches. The other thing we do, and Lauren talked on this as well, and placed in some of the other solutions, I know Brett and Jamie are going to talk about this as well right after me, is actually matching against a control. And we actually do a one-to-one match on the control. We actually match the control and the exposed. It's a forensic control, so we'll run the media and find the control after the fact. And the way we do that is we actually match the control group on are they visiting to the same location at the same frequency as the exposed, because it's very important that you're measuring those same locations that people are visiting in their local markets, because behaviors in New York and Manhattan are completely different than behaviors in eastern Los Angeles or rural Atlanta or even western parts of Idaho. So very, very important from our consideration to do that match at the locations being measured, and making sure you filter out employees, because employees will bias your measurement, and you have to make sure you account for that and not count the visits of those employees as a lift metric. The other thing we match on to create that control is a demographic and psychographic segments, because if you're running a campaign that's targeting professional women that are 34 to 54 with presence of children, you don't want to be doing a lift measurement against single males that are 18 to 24, because it will bias your measurement. So once you have that seasonality in the baseline and you can adjust for the incrementality, once you have that control and exposed match, you actually can do a lift. And so this is the methodology that we're using with the direct measure versus a panel approach, which Lauren and was talking about with the place team. And again, just some considerations to look at. Precision does matter. I'll go through these quickly before we get to the Microsoft case study. I really like this example in the middle. This is, talking about bars and Van Diemen's there in New York. It's the same thing. If you look at, this is a female audience, actually a female individual with children. There's a large difference between somebody going to lunch daily to the Golden Dragon versus the dive bar next door, which is 100 feet away. So if you are doing a direct measure approach and you are using that location signal, it really does matter that you can get down to that precision, because there's different audiences going to different locations. Just really quickly, again, as you're looking at location signal, the location signal is coming from the location services on the phone. Again, users can opt out. There's a lot of privacy controls, that can be put into place, with OBA compliance and trustee, and other opt-out, OBA compliance opt-out, which highly recommend considering as you engage with people. You want to make sure that you're actually getting that location signal to go and measure in store that's going down, into the granularity to measure in store, which means having enough decimals on the lat long signal, making sure it's not an IP address that's actually been translated to a geo, which tends to be a centroid of a zip code, and just making sure that you can handle that location signal on the front end all the way through from audience building to measurement. So a little bit of the detail of methodology and kind of our view of the world in regards to location signal, a direct measure approach, and the things that are important to consider in filtering out the noise, whether you're building an audience or measurement. Let's talk a little bit about what we did for Microsoft. So they wanted to run a holiday campaign in the 41 DMAs where they have a retail presence. They wanted to geofence, as Joe had talked about, around their stores within a 10-mile radius, but they wanted to further target specific audiences. Again, in this case, tech enthusiasts, holiday shoppers, competitive shoppers, and some big box conquesting. And what this graph is showing, and very similar to what Lauren showed you, is again, we have a general population. So this is everybody with a cell phone over here, indexed to 100, because we all work in the media industry. We have a control group, and you can see this control group is already going into the stores. Now, the control group looks pretty similar to the general population, and this is the audience that we wanted to show you. More niche audience will actually index a little bit higher in visits. But again, the control group is naturally going in already, whether it's other promotions are running or affinity for the Microsoft locations. And this far right bar is the exposed audience. So these are the individuals that actually saw the ad. And what this is telling you is the lift based on the incremental lift, so not counting the total visits, but the incremental lift of exposing this audience to the Microsoft Creative, which was done across video, rich media, and some other creative executions. they were going in 80% more than their peer group that they matched against in a control group, and 91% more than the general population. And this is some interesting metrics. What gets really cool, and again, you can do is as you dive into the audiences and looking at who did you expose the media to versus who visited, and you can see some patterns of, it might index high female, it might index high female with children, it might index high with people that are already in the mall location proximity-wise. So there's a lot of things you can do here with your clients. Having media planning discussions, to augment your click-through performance, to augment your digital sign-ups, with your offline retail to really drive a media planning discussion for your next buy. So this is, this is the approach we're taking. This is the success we've had in this particular case with the retailer, electronics retailer. And thank you for your time. And I look forward to hearing what Brett and Jamie have to say next.
Great. Thank you, Keith. That was terrific. Another kind of set of complementary, I guess, insights and thoughts and concepts, but all really good stuff. I love the idea of we've heard now about testing a PC campaign and a mobile campaign, and different specific kinds of metrics, all related to did somebody follow suit and go to a particular location based on their exposure to that ad. So that's great. Without further ado, I will hand things over to our third case study, which will be Brett. Brett Cohn is Vice President of Marketing at ThinkNear by Telenav, and I think you should have control right now, so if you do, take it away.
Great, thanks, Joe, and thanks again for everybody joining on the call. I think anybody new to mobile is quickly seeing that location is pretty much the topic du jour, and it has essentially become not just a tactic within mobile, but essentially the primary driving strategy within mobile. So great to see the content here, and thanks again for everybody joining. We wanted to take a little bit different course with our case study and actually show some research we did on behalf of Jeep, Chrysler, and Ansible, and look a little bit more at the data that's driving some of these strategies. I think Lauren and Keith outlined some great aspects of it, and we wanted to look at what's underneath the hood a little bit more in terms of data quality and how that can impact campaign success. And okay, yep, it is working. For those of you who don't know ThinkNear, a quick slide about us. We are a location-based mobile marketing platform. We tend to focus on using location data to create audiences and then deliver campaigns in a programmatic way for brands and agencies. We are a division of Telenav, who many people may know. Telenav is a public company who's been building location-based services for folks like Sprint, AT&T, Ford, and GM for over 15 years. So location is pretty much in our DNA, and that's where we've always focused. But today, in terms of talking about what we did for Jeep and Ansible, as I mentioned, we took more of a research approach with this. And what we wanted to do was really understand how the accuracy and quality of the location data for a particular campaign would actually impact the results. And for those of you who are in the space, I think you've probably heard a lot over the course of the past year about location data accuracy, accuracy versus precision, data quality, et cetera. And there is a known issue with data quality in the space, and when we talk about data quality and accuracy, what we're talking about is the data that comes from publishers in the mobile space as part of an ad request typically has a piece of location data associated with it, and that data typically is meant to imply where a user is in real time. And depending on who you ask, it ranges from 30 to 40% of that data is actually truly accurate in terms of telling the ad platforms where a user is at that real point in time. And that data is important because there are a lot of campaigns that are proximity-based in terms of using geofences to target a user when they're nearby something. But there are a lot of campaigns that are more behavioral-based or audience-based, where we want to understand the profile of a particular user and where they've been over time in terms of the places they shop, the neighborhoods they live in, the places they go for entertainment, because that really helps us create an audience, and that's why that data accuracy is so important. So that was the primary objective for the work we did for Jeep, but we also wanted to look at how data quality would impact audience engagement, and also how data quality could impact a metric relative to the automotive space of a cost per dealer visit. So to give you a little insight into what the campaign looked like, on the creative side, we were using a lot of typical IAB banners, but we were inputting a lot of dynamic content. So this campaign ran both in the California and New England regions. And what we wanted to do is put a 2-mile geofence around all of the Jeep dealers and then make the content dynamic so that it would be a little bit more contextually relevant. And this is a pretty typical strategy for most proximity-based location campaigns, so that you are making the experience a little bit more informative for the user and sharing some things like how far away they are from the nearest dealer. And those strategies tend to drive up engagement. On the landing page side, we gave the users a couple of different options. We had a click-to-video campaign to measure some of that upper funnel engagement. And then we did some things like enabling the ability to search local inventory, building their own Jeeps, and doing incentives so we can focus a little more on that lower funnel activity as well. We ran this creative across both of the campaigns in the study. So from the research perspective, the way we wanted to set this up, and again, it was more of a research effort than just a pure campaign that we were running, is we wanted to set up 2 test groups. One with what we call scored inventory, where we use Thinkner's location score platform, actually filter the location data that's coming in to say what data is good and can be relied upon for ad serving, and what data we would indicate or flag as being non-reliable. And so that was test group A that we served ads against. And then we went ahead and created test group B, which was unscored inventory. And this was these were campaigns that we ran where we took the data coming in through the programmatic exchanges or from publishers and took it at face value. And we did this because we really wanted to highlight the impact and the importance of being able to identify and filter out only the highest quality data for purposes of ad serving. And again, I think that flows into a lot of what other panelists have spoken about today, where we want to use the data for these new purposes. It's really important to have really accurate data before you do that. And what we saw was that the quality of data had a really significant impact. So let's start with the targeting results. So as I mentioned, we had set up these 2-mile geofences around Jeep dealers. And with the scored inventory, we saw that around 94% of impressions were delivered in that target geofence. And the unscored inventory, only around 29% of the impressions were delivered in the geofence, meaning that the data had actually not been reliable coming from the publishers. And the way we did this was by putting in some of our code into the landing page as well as the ad creative that would create an opt-in request for the user once they arrived at that landing page that allowed us to pull their real-time location data and then be able to compare that with the data that the publisher had sent us from the beginning. So pretty impactful in terms of being able to hit people within your target audience. A little bit more on this is just in terms of quantifying it. Those users with the scored data were around 1.3 miles away from the Jeep dealership, and those without the scored data were 7.1 miles away from the dealership. And I think you can think about it in the context of some of the examples Keith had shared, where you're really trying to understand an audience and looking at, are they in one particular store versus the store next door, or are they in a particular neighborhood or a different neighborhood. Without having really high quality data, you end up hitting a completely different audience. And you can see that, I think, with some of this data. So those were the targeting results. In terms of the actual performance results, again, we wanted to do some of the upper funnel measurement with the video views. And we saw that users inside the geofences had a 2x higher conversion rate on actually watching the video after the initial click. And again, that goes back to being able to really define and hit your target audience. If you reach that audience, the ad's going to be more relevant and you're going to be more efficient with your ad spend. For Jeep and the automotive space in general, obviously one of the key things that they are looking to do is drive foot traffic to the dealer lots, and that could be applied in the same context as retail or any other brick and mortar location. So like Lauren, we work with Placed quite a bit in terms of measuring foot traffic, and we do that to have that third-party validation. Like both Lauren and Keith mentioned, different approaches, and both have pros and cons. But for this campaign, we used placed. And what we saw was, relative to a control group, which would be indicated by the 100% bar, using higher quality scored location data had a much higher lift relative to the unscored data. And I think the interesting thing here was both the unscored data and the scored data both created lift. So just by running mobile, the agency and the brand were seeing lift in foot traffic, which is great. But with the higher quality data, you're seeing a much more efficient ad spend and driving a lot more users to the store. So I think it's an even better story when you've got the higher quality data. So that looked at the lift and driving more people to the dealer lots. But I thought what was really interesting was when we looked at the actual cost per dealer visit. And I have a little trouble getting to the next slide there. It seems to be hung up. Thanks, Joe. But when we looked at the actual cost per dealer visit with poor quality data, it was around $12.65 to get an incremental user to the dealer lot. With higher quality data, it was 35% lower. And again, that's because you're hitting the audience that you wanted to hit. And all of these brands and agencies spend a lot of money defining their audience segments and who their target market is. So when you're able to use higher quality location data to reach that audience, your ad spend is going to be a lot more efficient. So I thought those were great results to be able to show the impact of higher quality data and prove that the investment in some of those technologies really does tend to pay off. So in summary, we looked at the location data and saw that the results did have a significant impact on the campaign. And one thing I wanted to highlight again is that for us, location is much more than just this direct response tool. We're seeing the upper funnel tactics with video views as well as the lower funnel tactics with driving foot traffic. And again, would reinforce that the data accuracy, no matter what your tactic, really becomes important. So thanks again to the IAB for having us and letting us share some of these results.
Great, Brett, thanks. We are running a little behind schedule, so we'll move very quickly to our fourth and final case study of the day. I'm happy to turn things over to Jamie Molnar, who is Senior Manager of Mobile Client Solutions at the Weather Channel. Jamie, you should have control. Please take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. And I promise we will run through this quickly. I know we're a little bit short on time. I do also have a colleague of mine in the room with me, Nicole Jane, and we're going to kind of tag team this. Not sure if I have control yet, Joe. There we go. Perfect. So at the Weather Channel, this is a really exciting time for us. Mobile is really giving us the opportunity to combine two of our greatest strengths. That is our first-party location data combined with our proprietary weather data. And it allows us to bring advertisers a truly qualified, targeted audience at scale. And really for our marketers, that means less waste of their media dollars, really going beyond click-through rates to measure these in-store visits. So when we think about location at the Weather Channel, we think about it as in a couple of ways. So historically, we've always talked about geofencing, and that's a great tactic. But what we're really doing these days is looking at people's patterns of location visits and truly understanding their behaviors and creating personas out of that. We can really look at someone and understand their daily rituals have a huge impact on who they are, what they like to do, and where they like to go. So if we're looking at your average user, we see this as someone, she wakes up, she checks the weather, she's active, she goes to the gym daily, she always buys coffee, and we start to make certain assumptions about these types of people. We know, for example, that Jane is obviously a fitness enthusiast. So when a brand comes to us and that's the type of person they want to reach, we can use our wealth of location data to target those people directly. Additionally, those rituals that we all have every single day in our lives are greatly impacted by the weather conditions. For example, when we talked about Jane going to the gym 5 days a week, on days when it's really warm out, she's probably going to do that outside. And on days when it's freezing, she's going to take that and make it more of an indoor activity. So when we really look at our wealth of data, we look at the things that we're the best at. And number one is people opt in to share their location data with us. We see that over 80% of our users agree to show that location because it makes a lot of sense for their app experience to do so. We have extremely accurate data. We've got huge scale. We've got a tremendous comprehensive directory of places data to really be able to understand where they're going. And because of the direct impact that weather has, we are truly delivering an action-oriented consumer. And when you combine all of that with our proprietary weather effects platform, we really have the ability to serve truly targeted advertising. We're going to take you through a case study that we did with Ace Hardware. And the goal was really to drive in-store visits for seasonal products. And we did that by serving relevant messaging to the consumer. So I'm going to turn this over to Nicole, and she's going to walk you through some of the results of that.
Yeah. So this is the ACE campaign you see here with creative matching different weather conditions, really reaching that audience experiencing rain, snow, winter temperatures, those types of things. And I think what's really interesting about this campaign and this case study is that the campaign did not use location data for targeting. Really, it's only using that location data to do the measurement after the campaign has happened. So let's see the results. Great, so we have our campaign ran in Q4 of 2013, and we worked with a vendor that you guys are familiar with, Placed, our friend. We were testing this, going down the path of testing this type of measurement with Placed, and we saw an incredible lift. So again, really interesting here that we were able to change the behavior of those exposed to the media, not just because they were within a block of the store, they were at home, but that action-oriented creative showing, the store location in the creative really did drive those store visits and helped, with our measurement vendor Placed.
Wonderful. Was that quick enough for you, Joe?
That was great. That was super fast. Let me ask a couple of quick questions to you, just to make sure I get the case study that you just presented. This was a mobile ad campaign, right? It was weather on mobile devices, or was this across PCs and mobile?
This was on mobile devices.
Okay, that's what I thought. So wherever they, but it wasn't location targeted. Wherever they happened to see the ACE Hardware message, you were able to track three times the visit rate. That's pretty awesome stuff.
Yeah,
so,
it's targeted just to people experiencing that weather condition. So if it's snowing, we're serving you an ad for a snowblower, and the creative says, go to ACE Hardware. Here's the address.
Yep, terrific. Great. Well, so I think 4 great, diverse, and yet complementary perspectives on this emerging, but going to be very important use of location data. If anybody has questions on the call, please again submit them via the questions box. I've got a couple queued up already. One of them is clearly it seems like a no-brainer to use location data in this way if you're a retailer or an auto brand that has a bunch of dealer locations. Are there other kinds of industry verticals that any of you are talking to or have already started experimenting with ways to use location to track the ROI of their ad campaigns, folks beyond the retail category?
Yeah, hey Joe, this is Keith at Ninth Decimal. We actually find, believe it or not, when you're doing a new product launch in CPG where the brand managers don't have enough, spend data coming in at a consistent cadence, from their different distribution channels, whether it's grocery, whether it's drug or other, we actually find that the location signal and the measurement actually is a good proxy until the brand managers can get that, spend data. So we find it works really well in CPG for new product launches.
Great.
And this is Jamie at Weather Channel, and I would definitely agree. I don't think we're seeing any limitations for any of our verticals. When we talk about creating really these personas based on people's location history, that works just for, really any brand. And if we're talking about someone like an autos, one of the things we've discovered is, you know, it's great to reach people when they're in market and they're actually on an auto lot, but how do you know that you're reaching someone that's interested in a sedan versus a truck? So we're creating these great profiles of, let's say, what a truck buyer is and who they are. And we know things like truck people, they probably go to home improvement stores frequently. They like outdoor activities. So it's really taking location and taking it to that next level.
Great, thanks. You know, one of the things that occurred to me through all four of the presentations was you all talked a little bit about, you know, the need to be very careful about, you know, the conclusions that you draw from this kind of data, right? You know, whether somebody's store visit or in-store purchase was actually driven by, was caused by the ad exposure, or if it just happened to be something that would have happened whether they'd seen the ad or not. And this is kind of a big question, but can you talk a little bit more about your kind of ways statistically and methodologically, maybe not statistically, but methodologically, you know, kind of the importance of making sure that when you measure the impact of a campaign in this way, you are kind of controlling for you know, what people might have done anyway.
Yeah, Joe, I guess I'll take that one. It's you know, there's a lot of different techniques and things you can look at, but again, you know, just measurement methodologies, whether you're doing sales or location, you want to look at a historical pre-measurement period. You want to look in measurement period, and you want to look post-period. And again, at least for the location, you know, you want to make sure that you're accounting for employees, because you'll get a strong correlation and bias to an overstated lift measure if you're not accounting for employees. And you actually want to make sure you know, you're really matching and looking at those location visits across the measured locations, because you'll actually see a bias come into the measurement if you're not matching a control and expose at the actual locations you're measuring. If you're doing it in the neighborhood or the DMA or even at state level or a national level, you're going to get really wonky statistical distributions, because again, behaviors in New York or Manhattan are completely different than behaviors, like I said, in you know, a rural suburb of Texas or somewhere else. So those are some of the things we see from our direct measure approach to account for it, and you know, just that's our perspective.
Great, great. There's a question specifically for Lauren about the distillery case study, and that's you know, the metric that you used around return on ad spend, and whether or not you built that using actual transaction data from the retailer you're working with, or if you sort of got or calculated or estimated kind of the spending number that would have gone into that metric. Kind of, can you talk a little bit more about how you calculated that?
Yeah, sure. We actually did, we calculated that based off assumptions. In addition to getting, we didn't get granular feedback from the marketer, but we knew the overall total that we had driven. So we had some base information, but we didn't have the granularity that was associated to the actual people that we had hit in the campaign. So we worked with Placed and their ability to determine that in terms of overall sales. So it was calculated.
Okay, great. That's super helpful.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Just just to add on a little bit to that, and I don't want to speak for distillery, but I think in general, you know, a lot of the CPG brands and other brand advertisers are asking that question of how do we measure that. And I don't think anybody in the industry right now has a pure solution tied to a single ad impression back to a single transaction. But what we are seeing a lot of people doing is setting up test markets where they are measuring store-level sales data in aggregate versus another market. And I think from the brand side, we get the question of how do we do this, and I think where you're allocating big enough budgets to set up those control and exposed groups, that's the best approach that we've seen so far in terms of trying to get down to a true transaction measurement right now.
That makes a lot of sense. Keith, there's a question about ninth decimal. I think it's sort of broader than today's topic, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, can you say a few words about the source or sources of your location and places data, just kind of how you built that over time?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we got our roots, you know, we've been doing this since 2003 when we were in the Wi-Fi space, and of course when mobile came along in 2010, at least, you know, addressable media mobile. we're able just to extend that into data structures. We've got integrations across the ecosystem with, exchange partners, with supply-side partners, and with large direct publishers where we do have data usage rights. So, that's where we're actually able to build those audiences and do the measurement. And then we're also, like I said, working with a lot of large Madison Avenue agencies that have, 75+ channel partners they work with, where that's also augmenting some of the information on a per campaign basis. Hope that answers the question, Joe.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Excellent. And there's one more question. It's on the broad side, but can you, each of you, any of you, speak a little bit about the validation process? So the exact question is, how did you all validate store visits as you were doing these case studies? And I think in some ways that's a very big question. In some ways it's just kind of the answer is sort of, this is what we do for a living. But I feel like some of you kind of you use place. A few of the case studies use place. But can you speak a little bit more about validation? I think Keith, it actually comes back to kind of your point about the importance of having a really trusted source that can get very precise with location data. Maybe you want to take first stab at answering that question about the validation process here?
Yeah, sure. So there's two ways, right? So with, and again, I definitely want to hear from Jamie, and I wish David was on from Place because he's got some good, and Duncan from Place IQ because they've got some good perspective on this. With a panel base, you can of course, survey, the panel that was exposed, which is nice. In a direct measure approach, the law of big numbers basically gives you that validation because, you can see with the frequency and you see those folks and the patterns, so you know what's incremental versus what's not. And when you've been doing it for, many, many years, you start to see a pattern and you're able to validate it. There are folks out there that are going to start offering validation and location, type validation services, which will be another input. But in our research, when we found doing a survey, follow-up versus the law of big numbers of a direct measure, we see pretty strong correlation that, both work effectively.
Great, thanks. Any other perspectives or thoughts on the validation question?
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, it's Jamie.
Sorry, Jamie. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just briefly, I do know that Place, what they do is, obviously, they're looking at long signals, but just to confirm, to make sure that they actually went into the auto lot versus the McDonald's next door, is they're actually asking users via survey questions, just to go ahead and double check that, yes, I did, in fact, go into the auto lot.
Got it. So it's a combination of what you can get directly from the device on a user opt-in, I'm okay sharing this databases, but also the most explicit kind of way of all, just kind of asking in the form of a survey. Right?
Yeah, but asking based off of behavioral data, right? So knowing that that particular device showed a particular behavior and then confirming it afterwards with a question to make sure that the interpretation was correct.
Got it. Got it. Great. Well, last question, since we're just about out of time, would be, this is all very new. This is the first time the IAB has written a paper on this subject, but I have a feeling it won't be the last. I think this is a really interesting new aspect of the way that location is changing the way marketing and advertising get done. And so I'd like to ask you all to kind of gaze into your crystal ball for a second, and when we revisit in a year, let's say, do you think this is going to be common table stakes, still sort of on the cutting edge of ROI metrics for marketing? How fast do you think this is going to become a mainstream tool in a marketer's toolbox?
It's going to be table stakes.
Yeah, I got a second vote from Keith on that, and it's going to be omni-channel measurement table stakes.
Yes, I agree.
The cross-channel piece is really interesting, right? Cool. Brett?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to it is I think our biggest shift over the next year is that rather than the brick-and-mortar advertisers who have been the traditional leads in the location space, I think the biggest users of location data over the next year will actually be the brand advertisers, looking at audiences and how they identify behaviors.
That's great. Jamie, any other thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I just agree with what everyone said. I think this is going to be the year of catch-up. I hate to say that, but more and more users are really going to start realizing that this is an essential part of any media they buy, especially on mobile.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's a great last word to leave things on. So on behalf of the IAB, I'd like to thank again all of you for dialing in and attending today's call, and especially I'd like to thank Lauren, Keith, Brett, Jamie, and Nicole. You all were great. Definitely value your expertise. Thank you so much for the help today, and please join us again on future IAB mobile webinars. Have a very good afternoon, and happy tax day. I'll echo Keith on that one. So take care.
Bye, thanks.